Hello again, my name is Tom Wiggins, and welcome to the Sunshine State Book Festival. Hopefully, by now, you've gotten a chance to get over to my virtual booth, Tommy's Tales, and check out some of my works. There's a shorter video there that will give you an abstract about each one of my books. Um, First of all, I will tell you that right now I am in Kansas City, Missouri. I'm currently hunkered down in my basement on quarantine. I've been stricken with COVID 19, and my symptoms have been fairly mild. They come and go in waves, but the worst symptom of all has pretty much been boredom, stuck down here in the basement. So I thought, what better use of my time than to get to know my readers and help my readers get to know me a little bit better. I procrastinated on this video just about as long as I can. So first, a little bit about me. I was born in Fort Pierce, Florida, but I was raised my entire life in Hawthorne, Florida, which is a small town right outside of another small town of Gainesville, Florida, which I think many of the viewers are probably from Gainesville or at least from Florida. So hopefully you guys know where that is. If you haven't gotten a chance to go out to Hawthorne and check it out in a while, you should. It's a magical place. And I'm going to talk more about that when I tell you about some of my books here. So I'm born and raised Hawthorne, Florida. Most of my family is from Florida. They still live in Florida. I still have some family that lives on the family farm there in Hawthorne, and I get back to visit as regularly as possible. I've been getting some requests to speak to the local schools and whatnot, and I'm trying to make good on those requests, even if it's via Zoom, something like this. If you'd like me to come talk to your kids or some other type of organization, get with me. I'd be happy to do that. So I left Hawthorne, Florida after 9/11 as a direct cause of 9/11, and I joined the Army and went to basic training, actually, believe it or not, right here in Missouri. It was on the other side of Missouri, though, Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. It was my first experience with snow, I remember, which I'm very happy we haven't gotten much snow this winter because I'm not a fan. That's the Floridian in me. So I completed my basic training there, and then I went back to Fort Benning, and that's where I completed airborne school and all my ranger training. And then I ended up being stationed in Savannah, Georgia, which is where it's actually at Hunter Army Airfield, which is where 1st Ranger Battalion is stationed. And I completed my entire enlistment in that unit, which is an all-volunteer unit, of course, until I was wounded in action on my 5th combat deployment. I did 1 combat deployment to Iraq and 4 combat deployments to Afghanistan, and I was severely wounded in action in May of 2004 when I was struck directly by an RPG, actually in the back of the head, if you can believe it or not. So pretty lucky to be here. People say I'm hard-headed, and then the later joke was I'm airheaded. I had air on my skull. Well, that's another story. So from those injuries, I actually ended up being in a coma for about a couple of months, and then I was in the hospital for over a year until I received my implant, because a result of my injuries is I'm profoundly deaf, so they gave me an implant that allows me to hear in nice, quiet environments. So I did spend the last year or so of my enlistment at Walter Reed Army Medical Center in D.C., which also provided some interesting experiences for me. During that time, I met the owner of an aviation corporation called Evergreen Aviation, and he invited me to come. He called it Learn and Earn in Oregon. And I'll be honest, at first I wasn't very interested. I just wanted, to go back home and be with my friends, maybe go to school or something. Well, I retired from the Army July of 2005, and I went home, and I was home for a couple weeks, and it was extremely boring. I realized that my friends had moved on. Everybody had lives. Most of the friends I knew from my school days were out of school, and now they had families and jobs. So I called them up and said, okay, let's do this. So I packed up everything I owned and drove across the country, my 3rd country. I'd driven across Iraq, Afghanistan. Now I'd driven across the U.S., and I drove to Oregon. And I spent 5 years there, and during my time in Oregon, I worked at Evergreen Aviation, and I traveled to over 100 different countries, got many great experiences, got to see a lot of really cool places and meet a lot of really interesting people. I also went to school full-time and completed my bachelor's degree in business administration and management, and I completed that in 2009. And around that time, you may remember, I know a lot of us are trying to forget, but you may remember that the economy crashed. So It wasn't a lot of fun. It wasn't as much fun working at Evergreen. And around that time, I heard of a program called the Army Wounded Warrior Education Initiative, which would bring Army Wounded Warriors to Kansas to go to the University of Kansas and get their master's degree. And they would provide the Wounded Warrior with a job with the U.S. Army as a DA civilian. Well, I felt the calling again, and that's what brought me to Kansas. And I completed my master's in about a year and a half. And that master's was in leadership and policy, and there was a lot of different focuses there. But at the end of the day, I was just trying to be a better, well-rounded person. And so once I completed that degree, then I had kind of a choice of where did I want to go, what Army installation. I want to go back to the East Coast. There weren't many options on the West Coast. Do I want to stay here? So I figured since I was already here and I already had started building these relationships, I'd stay at the university in Kansas and complete my doctorate, which I did. I have a doctorate in education, and I've been teaching here at Fort Leavenworth, at the Command General Staff College, Army University, Army Management Staff College. We all kind of tied together and teach things together. And while I teach out of Fort Leavenworth, we do travel a lot around the country, so I do get to see a lot of installations and see how they've changed and grown over the years. Also, while all of that was going on, I had a family. I married while I was in Oregon, and I had my first child in 2008. She is 12 now, and I had my son while I was working on my master's degree here in Kansas, and he is now 10. So unfortunately, the marriage did not last, and she has since moved back to Oregon, so we split the time between the children. The children come here parts of the year, and they stay with her parts of the year. And, something like that's really hard at first, but we've made it work. And that will actually come to play in some of the stories of why these books have come to be and why they've gotten written, and how they've gotten written. So overall, it's been a very interesting 20 years. I'm at the point now where I feel like I'm kind of ready to come back home and be back in Florida, really kind of sick of the cold, missing my family. My family's getting up there in age. So there's lots still to look forward to for me, of course. So I was trying to figure out what I was going to talk to you guys about for 45 minutes here on video. I know some of you have probably already clicked off. It's kind of boring just sitting here watching a guy sitting in his basement talking to the camera. But I went on my Facebook page. Tommy Tales can be found on Facebook and Instagram. And I asked, what are some things you guys would like to know about me or about things I've written? And I got some responses, and some people asked some questions. I asked that same question on the Hope for Hawthorne page, and I got some responses there as well. And so I captured 4 or 5 of the ones that I liked the best, and I thought I would answer them. And the first one I wrote down here, I wrote it in my little journal here, and it said, what inspires you to write? That's a good question. I never expected it would keep me up night after night for 2 weeks, but it has. What inspires me to write? And, I was thinking about it in the context of each book, and with each story that I've written, I've found different inspiration. The story is what inspires me, but I think overall, the reason I've always wanted to be a writer, and that I want to write and I want to become a better writer, is one, to be known. And I don't mean that in the context of to be famous, but it's easy to feel like people don't know me, especially, given my disabilities and my ability to communicate, maybe sometimes not as effectively as I would like. So I feel like as you read my stories, you get to know me. The other thing is just simply not to be forgotten. I hope that long after I leave this earth, which hopefully has still got a little ways ahead of me, but there'll be something left of me to remember me by. And I understand I have my kids, and hopefully, God willing, I'll have grandkids and whatnot. But it's something to be said for something in black and white, something written down, people will remember. So that's kind of the overall, the holistic answer of what inspires me to write. Now, each one of these stories were inspired by different circumstances, and I thought I would tell you a little bit about that. Firstly, this book, 100 Days in the Game, which I told you was no longer in print, but I do have copies here in the house that I sometimes release. So basically, I knew that I had always known I wanted to be a writer, but I did not have the experience. I wrote this book when I was 20 or 21 years old, right in there. So I was very young, and didn't really know what to write about. So what do you write about? You write what you know. So I had limited experience, but really, I say limited experience. At the age of 20 or 21, I just think about everything that I had been through, and just being shot and just being rendered deaf. And I thought it would make a good story, but how that began actually was someone from my unit came up and they had put together kind of a scrapbook with a bunch of pictures of the guys that I served with. And we were looking through it in my hospital room. He was showing it to me and we were laughing and sharing stories. And my grandmother was sitting there and she said, and she was looking at the pictures and went through it and she kept asking, who is this? Who is this? Because she had no idea who these people were. I said, oh, well, that was so-and-so. This is this person. Oh, this guy's a great guy. And she said, well, you ought to write names on the backs of the pictures because one day you will forget. You will want to remember that. I thought to myself, there's no way I'll forget any of these guys. These people are very important to me. They're an important part of my lives. Well, here I am 20 years later, and I'm telling you, I'm glad that I listened to him put those names on it because I look at the picture, I'm like, oh, yeah, I remember his face, but I can't remember. Who is that? So I flipped the picture over. Oh, Aaron Anderson. I got it. I remember that guy now. So that kind of is what prompted me to start writing this book. I was in the hospital for over a year. There was not a whole lot I could do. I remember the only other thing I could do, because I had to learn how to walk again and all kinds of things. So I couldn't, for a long time, I could not even really get out of bed. And there's only so much TV you could watch, especially there were limited captions available back then. And because I was newly deaf, right? And so, they had laptops you could sign out, and so I started writing down my story. And like I say, I think that my grandmother may have originally prompted me to write this down, and I began writing it down. I didn't finish. I wrote a lot of it in the hospital, and then I got out of the hospital, and life happened very quickly. I retired, moved across country, started a new career, started going to school. It was all crazy, and while I was at Evergreen, I kind of became like the poster boy, right? So the owner had me meeting with all these big wigs. I mean, when I say big wigs, owners of companies, senators, congressmen. I met 3 presidents during my time there, traveling all over the world, meeting with people, and it was kind of like, I was a lot of me sharing my story. I was like, and I said to him one day, I was like, I wrote this down. We should just publish a book so I don't have to tell the story anymore. He said, yes, we should. I said, okay. So I went back, and actually I remember specifically that first summer, me and Monty were sent to D.C., and we were doing some lobbying there for some initiative. And in the evenings, I was working on cleaning this up and writing it. And I pretty much published it from there. And I remember my English teacher during my associate's degree, she actually went through and kind of edited it for me some. So this by no means is my cleanest book, but people seem to love the story. I was kind of embarrassed by it for a long time. Once I got my education, got a master's, got a doctorate in teaching, doing things, and then I kind of you kind of realize it. So while I was at Walter Reed, you have everybody 24 hours a day for 7 days a week for almost a year telling you how special you are and what a miracle you are to be alive. And so you begin to believe that, or I did. But then you hit a point where it's kind of like everybody has their own story. People have similar stories. So I did kind of shelf this for a while. It's still around if you want to look at it. You can find it. There are some pictures in here, and it just walks you through kind of my journey into becoming a ranger and my 5 combat deployments, and then what happened to me, of course. And it ends when I'm actually in my bachelor's program. So I guess that's what inspired me to write this book, just to kind of write down the story. So hopefully I remember it. And I was actually just recently thinking, because someone mentioned something from the story and I had no idea what they were talking about. So I might actually go back and read this sometime soon, just so I can kind of remember some of these stories, and remember some of this time that was an important part of my transformative period of my life. So The next book, I'm gonna take a drink of water. Sorry, and if I cough or sneeze, that's the COVID talking, not me being rude. So then, around the time, I think maybe I had just finished up my master's degree and I was teaching the captain's career course for the U.S. Army, and I had this idea because I was working with several different wounded warriors at the time uh, for a book, or I had this idea, this concept, something called disabled leadership. And I started using that term when I was referring to wounded warriors or when I saw someone with a disability doing something that I thought was incredible. So that's kind of where the inspiration of the idea from this originated. The other wounded warriors that I got to know and work with over the years. And then I moved, I got promoted and I started teaching higher level education courses for the Army. And I was teaching Army executives, high level Army executives, and inevitably, almost in every course, there was someone with some type of disability, and they were continuously impressing me. And I share some of the stories in here, but one story that always stuck with me, I had this gentleman, and his name was Angeliki, and he had cerebral palsy, and just looking at him, you would not expect much from him, but the sheer fact that he was a GS-13 already tells you a lot. GS-13 is a pretty high position, so that's pretty impressive. But then to travel across the country to come to this course, it's extremely hard. It was extremely hard, difficult for him just to walk up to get to the class. Um, we had requirements in the course such as you had to write an essay and every day you have to write a journal, and he probably could have gotten away with not doing any of that, but he did. He was always the first one, and I would see him, chicken pecking the keyboard. He's typing this 1,000 word essay probably at the rate of maybe a word or two per minute, and I just think about how long that must have taken him, but he still did it, and it was really impressive for me. So I use stories like that in here to demonstrate how disabled people demonstrate leadership skills better than the rest of us, and how we can emulate them to be better leaders ourselves. So, just to give you the definition, the way I define disabled leadership is disabled leadership is a person's ability to gain self awareness of their greatest weakness and develop it into a platform to conceive, believe, and achieve life goals through empowerment built from a foundation of resilience. So it's kind of wordy, but it's extremely important, I think. And if you want to know the abstract of this book, I would go back to my virtual booth at Tommy's Tales and hear all about it, because I read you the abstract on the back and then I walk you through the table of contents here. But the thing I will share with you here is through as we're working through the different concepts in this book, self-awareness. I talk about building a platform from your weakness, building your weakness into your greatest strength, using that to empower yourself and others. Talking about how resilience is the foundation of everything that we do. I share a lot of great stories in here, and there's some. I cover everything from. So I've got a couple of Wounded Warrior buddies I have that were missing legs. A girl that I went to college with who was blind, actually. She got her story in there. Uh, uh, an employee that I had at the Evergreen Aviation Museum who was autistic or on the autism spectrum. So it covers a very wide range of disabilities, and it shows you how we can turn those disabilities into something more meaningful to us, and how we shouldn't try to avoid them, but we should try to use them and build them into a platform to inspire and empower ourselves and others. So I think it's pretty apparent what inspired this book, just my own disability and seeing others' disabilities and working with it. And I'll tell you, I've shared this story in the past, but um, when I got shot and became deaf, I could read. I don't want to say I could not read, but I was not a very good reader. It's not something I enjoyed doing. I did not go out of my way to read. Certainly did not read for pleasure. When I became deaf, all of a sudden I was forced to read now, because even if I wanted to watch TV, I had to read captions. And I tell people it was very, very difficult at first. It was hard, just trying to keep up with the captions, understand them, and keep up with what's happening on the show or whatever. And then because it was about a year and a half before I got my implant. Also, if I wanted to communicate with people, they had to write to me on a board. So I was reading there too. So um, I feel like, and I kind of told people this before, um, my disability empowered me to be where I am today. Because who knows, I still might be a terrible reader. So I went from hating to read to, I mean, this is my basement collection of books back here. These are the ones I'm not worried about if they get damp and messy. I mean, I've read so many books, and now I've written 4 books, have a doctorate. Um, so I feel like everything happens for a reason, and I want people to understand that and embrace their disabled leadership. Okay, so what inspired my next book, The Happening in Hawthorne, and this was the first fiction book that I've written, and I will tell you, I got addicted very quickly. I love this. As opposed to when I was writing disabled leadership, and I'm trying to list out citations and prove things, and I'm worried about who's going to try to poke a hole in my theories. With this, I didn't have to worry about that at all. When writing fiction, it was almost plug and play. It's just so fun, and you get writing, and it's almost kind of like I'm living the story, which is how I got so sucked into it and wrote it so quickly, because I wrote this in under a year, easily under a year, and that's while working full time, and all these other things that were happening. Actually, can I remember? Yeah. So so this was during the pandemic, because when I published this as well. So there were a lot of things going on, but I was still able to complete this. And actually, maybe the pandemic helped me, because I was at home. We couldn't go out and do a lot. So I call all of these books pandemic gold, right? Quarantine gold. Um, so a couple different things inspired me to write this story. It actually began in fall of 2019 when I was back home, and I was on the farm, and I was starting to try to clean up my part. There was some double wide trailers that need to come off the property before we can really start building it up again. And so I began working on those with my Uncle Ray, and we were tearing them down. And I realized not only the town but the farm, what a special, magical place it was. And I was walking around, and I went back to the old creek, and I was walking back in the woods a little bit, and I walked through the cow pastures and was petting them and feeding them, and I'd go down to the pond, and all these different things going on. And I thought, wow, I had always hoped that maybe one day I would be able to raise my own children there, and obviously that's not able to happen, but I wanted to share with them what a magical place it was. And then on the other hand, I also wanted to make sure that the older generation understood what an incredible impact and influence they've had on us kids, and in our raising, when they're raising us when we were children, and even as adults, what we continue to do and what we continue to accomplish and be successful. So I began writing this, and when I started writing it, it was not I had no idea it was going to be what it was, that it would be a paranormal, have a paranormal element, or some people might, I wouldn't say a horror story. It's a mystery for sure. I call it a hometown mystery, but I did not know that I was going to write. When I first started writing the first chapter, I just started writing about what it was like to go home. As I'm pulling down 301 and I see the farm up ahead on the right, what does that look like? What did that feel like? What did it feel like crossing over the railroad tracks onto the farm? And then it just slowly kind of took a life of its own, became its own thing. I essentially got sucked into the story, and it became a part of me, and I became a part of it. It was like, okay, I'm hunkered down, I'm quarantined in Kansas City, Missouri, but my heart is back in Hawthorne, Florida, so let it live there. And that's where it lived for most of the year as I was writing this story. And it was like I was a kid again. So the story hops back and forth between the early 90s, when I was a child being raised on the farm, and then 2020 as I'm going back trying to clean up the farm, and get it ready for to move back there, and build a life there for the future, right? And so people seem to enjoy how it went back and forth like that. So that is what inspired me to write this story. I, as far as the different things in it that inspired me, the people in it, the inspiration was easy. All of the people and the places in this story are very real. Every single person, place, most of the events are real. The things that just happened to us as kids, things that happened on the farm, with the railroad spike. We had a panther out on the farm once. We've had bears. So there are different things that happen on the farm over the years. Of course, the house being the focal point of the story was an old farmhouse that my great grandmother lived in, and my grandmother was born in, and all of those guys were raised in. Uh, and so the inspiration for this story was very simple, very easy. But here's my opportunity to tell you guys I've been inspired beyond this. Exciting announcement. So everyone kept asking for a sequel, asking for a sequel. And initially, when I published this and people started asking, I was like, what? No, no way. Even though I left it open, I don't want to, no spoiler or anything, but at the end, I left it open for a sequel. And one night, the inspiration struck, and all of a sudden, I thought about the perfect sequel for this book. And so I will tell you, my goal is to have the sequel out, and the sequel is going to be titled A Hope for Hawthorne. So this one's titled A Happening for Hawthorne. The sequel is going to be titled A Hope for Hawthorne, and it focuses more on what happened to Molly. See, I'm not giving any spoilers, but it focuses on what happened to Molly, and then it also focuses more on the town of Hawthorne in the 1920s. And so I don't want to give away too much more there what happens with the story, but I think you guys are really going to like it a lot. So I'm enjoying writing it. I am about 50,000 words in so far. I'm hoping to get another 30 or 40,000 words into the Hope for Hawthorne. So it'll probably be a little bigger than this one, which is around 240 pages. So that's what inspired that. Now, one moment, I can take a drink. The inspiration for The Spirit of the North. And this one's really interesting. I wrote this with my 10-year-old daughter. Well, she was 10 at the time. She's now 12. And the inspiration was, I told you that she spends part of the year in Oregon with her mother and part with me here in Kansas and Missouri. So I get her for Christmas break. So somewhere in that process, when she was 9 years old and her little brother was about 6 or 7, someone said to them, because they were having Christmas in Oregon before they came here, so they wound up telling them that Santa wasn't real. So when Madeline was 10 years old, she told everyone Santa's not real. She doesn't believe in Santa. So, of course, I had to have a talk with her. And I just kind of started. I was like, okay, if you don't believe in Santa Claus, what do you believe in? And she started this story basically about, well, I believe in the spirit of Christmas. I believe that St. Nicholas was really a person, and and so I started writing some of that down and thinking about how I could develop it into a story. When she was here for that Christmas 2 years ago, and when she left and went back to Oregon, I really jumped into it and started writing a lot. I remember actually I was on a mobile education team, and I think I was at Rock Island Arsenal in Illinois. And so I had tons of free time to write. I was just in a hotel, and it was, I remember it was like negative 50 degrees outside, so I did not leave the hotel. And so I was just writing, and I wrote a lot during that time. And when I would Skype my daughter twice a week, we would talk about the story that I was writing. I would read her bits and pieces and say, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And she would offer me feedback, and I would write some more. And that was pretty special to me, but it was also important because after doing the Skyping thing for, kids are young, they want to go play, and you run out of things to talk about after a while. That's what I found, at least. And so this gave us something to talk about, and it allowed us to use our imagination to build a narrative. And so we really enjoyed it. And again, same as before, if you want to know more about what the story is about, go and see the short 15-minute video where I read the back and give you an abstract about it. And it's in 3 parts, and I think you guys will really enjoy that. So those are the ways that each one of these stories were inspired. That's kind of a lengthy answer, I realize. Hopefully, I probably ate up some of my 45 minutes here. Oh wow, I'm already at 30 minutes, so I still have 4 more questions I want to answer for you guys. So let's see another one here. Um, who are some of your favorite authors? Oh, that's a great question. So um, probably my first favorite author, and she is still my favorite author, but it was S.E. Hinton, author of The Outsiders. That was then, This Is Now, Tex, all of those great books. Um, those are pretty much the first two, especially The Outsiders, and that was then, This Is Now. Those were basically like the only books I read in high school, and I read them over and over again. Each year, you go through ninth grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, and you have to do like book reports and things. I would always choose one of her books. They just really resonated with me, as they have with millions of people. And so that's kind of what got me started reading. Of course, I told you I still was not a big reader until later on, but even so, even since, I have multiple copies of The Outsiders and all of her text here on my shelf. So I do go back and read those occasionally. Those are actually some of the only books I've gone back and read multiple times. I'm not one of those people who go back and read books time and time again. So she's certainly one of the bigger ones. And then my current favorite author, currently, and I say currently, but it's actually been a number of years now, and he's really been an inspiration for me just because I enjoy his writing so much and his storytelling ability. And that is Neil Gaiman, and I know most of you guys will all be aware of Neil Gaiman, but I've read all of his books. And if you don't see them on the shelves here, that's because they're on my upstairs bookshelf. I've got a whole shelf dedicated to him, all of his stuff. I even have multiple signed copies of some of his works. To the point, I don't know if any of my fellow authors out there have taken or heard of the master's classes, but I've taken his master's class on storytelling a couple times, and it's just he's so inspirational. There are some technical things I took away from him, but the way he says things and me think about them helps me to become a better writer. And probably, and this will seem very simplistic, but probably the most important thing I learned from Neil Gaiman is that a writer doesn't concern themselves with the truth. Yeah, a writer doesn't concern themselves with the truth. And the first time I heard him say that, I was like, what? Because it was difficult. Because at that point, all I had written is nonfiction, and I'm churning out articles and essays and stuff for academic reviews and things like that. And I hadn't really gotten into fiction yet, but I wanted to, and so I found that was very difficult, and I struggled with that at first with the happening in Hawthorne, because as I was writing about something that may have happened as a child, for example, the railroad spike story, and I'm telling people about it, but you want to exaggerate it to make it seem more interesting and make it seem more entertaining. And at first I had a hard time doing that, and I think I'm getting better at that. I hope I am anyway. So yeah, writers don't concern themselves with the truth. Good advice for fiction writers, I think. So those are a couple of my favorite authors. Some of the other guys, I was into Tom Clancy for a while. I tried to get into James Patterson just because he's been so immensely successful, but those are, when I want to fast read, I'll look at one of those, but they're almost too quick for me. So let's see. And that's answered a couple of the questions, actually. Some of the questions are similar here. My top 5 favorite books, and I've already shared a couple of them with you, being The Outsiders, That Was Then, This Is Now. Those are some of my all-time favorite. Anything Neil Gaiman, I'm going to love. I've actually been thinking about going back and reading American Gods again, which is my favorite book of his, but I enjoy the stuff that would be considered young adult even more, I think, as far as like Ocean at the End of the Lane, The Graveyard, which both of my kids have read those, and which I enjoy when we sometimes are able to read the same thing. So I've always had a hard time with favorites. Everybody, people asking things like, what's your favorite color? What's your favorite car? What's your favorite book? And I have a very tough time, especially I think a lot of us do, have a tough time figuring out what our favorite book is. So that's pretty difficult. I will tell you, a favorite book for me is anything that I'm able to sit and read with my children. Ever since my kids were old enough to understand what I was saying, and before probably, when they were toddlers in my lap reading to them, and now they're getting up there, and my daughter will be a teenager this summer, but I still love reading to her. And I know some people think I'm kind of a weirdo reading to my 13-year-old daughter, but she loves it too. So as long as she will allow me to read to her, I will. And hopefully we will discover new favorite books together as well. Oh gosh, so many. I'm not even going to try to come up with any more favorite books for you. Um, I'll answer one more question for you. I think I'm running out of time here. Let's see. Okay, so another question I had was, how do you manage time to allow writing? And I've actually gotten this question multiple times because I published two books within a couple months of each other, and both of those books were, 250, 300 pages long. So people are like, how did you do this? Well, first of all, obviously, I did not write two 250-page books in a matter of a couple months. I worked on both of those over the span of a couple of years. However, I've really just been lucky up to this point with how it's worked out for me. So, well, I don't want to say lucky, but with my first book, The Combat Memoir, I was hospitalized. There was nothing else I could really do besides sit and write or watch TV, and I'd much prefer to write or read than to watch TV. So that allowed me time to write that, and then when I was on that trip in DC, I was able to do the editing and get it printed out so I could get it published. So I had some time there in the evenings when I was in DC lobbying for the summer. So that's how I got that one done. And then disabled leadership by far took the longest. I sat on that one for years just because I was so busy. I told you guys, I think I had the idea for disabled leadership in 2011, somewhere around then, and I didn't ever publish it until 2019. And the writing was, I would write 10 pages or a chapter here, another chapter or two, and maybe this year, next year another chapter or two. It was kind of as I was going through experiencing these things, capturing the experiences, synthesizing them, trying to make them entertaining yet understandable for folks that might read it. And I tell people a lot of times that a lot of the information in disabled leadership is very similar to things you will get in other leadership books, but it's through a different lens and maybe for a different demographic. That being said, disabled leadership is not only for disabled people. I'd say it's more of a lesson from disabled people. So that one just took a long time to write and get published. I did write on it, and hopefully this won't get back to my work, but I wrote some on this one at work simply because many of the experiences that I capture and talk about in that book happened at work. People so if I saw something happening with, for example, I mentioned Angeliki with his challenges with cerebral palsy, I'd write down notes about it at work. So that kind of tactic for me has been extremely helpful and helped me be successful in everything, because all the way through college I worked full time, and I always felt like the schooling helped me succeed in my work, and the work certainly helped me succeed in academia. So I was always able to fit them together and help them help me. So yeah, that's how that one went. And then The Happening in Hawthorne aligned very nicely with the pandemic, to be honest. Actually, when I started it, I was on another med. I think I had began it, but then I got the first, several chapters out while I was at Picatinny, New Jersey, which is outside of New York City. I was there for a month, and again, it was cold. That was the heart of January, so I got writing, and then I was just inspired. And we had this pandemic, and everything's been kind of closed down. So I'm gonna knock this out. I'm gonna get it done, and I did. I sat down and just powered through just while we were figuring everything out. We weren't teaching. The courses were shut down. We hadn't figured out how to teach virtual classes yet. So I kind of had a lot more time than normal to write, and it came so quickly and easily, and it was so much fun. I was able to get that done quickly. So that was by far my quickest book, and I did that one, like I said, in under a year. and that one's around 250 pages. This next one, A Hope for Hawthorne, is flowing very quickly and fluidly too, and I've already got the idea for the third, so it'll probably be a trilogy, and the third one will be titled The Heart of Hawthorne, which I don't want to give anything away about the second one, but yeah, so that one went the quickest. So that's had time, just the pandemic. And then The Spirit of the North, that one actually, that one took about 2 years. And I did a lot of my writing on the Mets when I was there. So at night I would just be sitting and writing in my hotel room, or I'd go down to the lobby and, have a beer and just write. And um, I realize now that, if I had my kids here all the time, I would not have near as much time to write. So I guess that helps as well, not, raising children full time, which is a terrible thing, but hopefully they'll get something out of this as well, if nothing more than inspiration. Um, so actually, with The Spirit of the North, I did hit a wall because I got part one and part two done of the book, and then part three, I knew what I wanted to do. I just didn't know how to do it. So basically, in part three, it's set in the present day, and Nicholas is kind of like, okay, the world's evolved beyond me. People have more than they could ever want or need. So what more can I offer? And he feels like the world has surpassed this concept of goodwill and kindness, and it doesn't really exist anymore. So he wants to make one last big push to inspire the world towards kindness and goodwill. And I wasn't really sure how to do that. And I finally got it figured out, and I kind of just pushed myself through it. I've never been 100% in love with the way I ended the book, but I've gotten some good feedback on it. I think it could be developed further, maybe later. I was thinking about maybe doing different editions, like, because I have the book like relaunch every Christmas, and add a little bit more to it and go a little deeper. So hopefully I will find some inspiration farther down the road for that. But yeah, so those are my four books. That's how I've managed to have time for it. And the one I'm working on now, I've kind of hit that, what you guys are talking about, how do you have time? Because now I'm teaching 2 classes virtually right now. Oh, by the way, I have COVID. Plus, I've committed to doing things like this, making a 45-minute video talking to myself in my basement, speaking at some different schools via Zoom. All of this is with my hearing loss, so it's been a challenge, but the challenges are what keep us going. And I really appreciate the opportunity to share with you guys. So, hey, once again, I'm sure we've got to be getting close to 45 minutes, but I appreciate you guys coming back and sitting with me today and allowing me a little more time to talk about the things I'm working on, in the future. Let's see how much time I have left. It's 42 minutes. So you know what I'm going to do for you? I think I have 3 minutes left. I am going to share a little bit more with you about A Hope for Hawthorne. So if you stuck with me, you're going to get something that no one else got. So in A Hope for Hawthorne, Madeline has the frame from the book. You don't have to read The Happening of Hawthorne to know what I'm talking about, the frame. And she realizes if you hold the frame and read the back of it, it says, "Come home," that the frame is now a portal to Bristow Farms in 1928. And and I had learned that she's been going back to 1928 for like 6 months without me knowing. So finally I find out, and I go back with her, and as we work through it, we realize that we think that something or someone wants us to save Molly, which is a character that I can't give too much away. It's hard telling you guys about this without ruining the story. So we think we're going back to save someone. We're trying to figure out how that works. Well, in the process of doing my research and going back and learning things, we come to find out that we can save more than Molly. We can possibly save the town. So we find out something happened in Hawthorne in 1928. And so what I did for that is I went back and researched. I was just trying to find out what tragedies happened. First of all, yikes, there were several lynchings that happened in the 20s that were pretty terrible. But there was also a huge hurricane that hit in 1928, hit Florida. And back then they could not track hurricanes. And so hurricanes didn't have names or anything, and they just kind of popped up unannounced, and they were devastating. And so this hurricane was called the Killer Hurricane, and it wiped out thousands of people. So what I've done in the story is I brought the hurricane through Hawthorne, and so what we figure is that it flooded Town Lake and killed a ton of people. So we're going to try to figure out how to save them in the book, how to change history, and it's me walking through figuring out how to do that. And in the end, I'm trying not to give too much away. I do figure out how to change history, but it really changes history big time in a way you could not expect, in a good way, in a way that'll be very surprising. And then there's a big twist it's going to be a big twist in the end of the story. And the tagline on the front of the book is, "Second chances don't come cheap." Second chances don't come cheap. So remember that and keep that in your pocket, and we'll see what you guys think of it next year. Again, hey, thank you guys for sitting with me. And again, I am Tom Wiggins, writer for Tommy's Tales. Check out my 4 books. All of them are available on Amazon. All of my books are available in bookstores everywhere. Just give them an order. Give me a shout out. Shoot me an email. If you have my number, shoot me a text. I'll be happy to work with you on setting anything up. And you guys have a great time here at the Sunshine State Book Festival. Thank you.